Let's bring in our guest to discuss this. Joining us now this hour, national trial attorney Mike Jaafar is with us. Michael, I know we've been talking about the defense, but let's start with the state, the one who has the burden in this case. This jury is taking in everything, they're deliberating, and during closing arguments, they talked about community and those confessions. I really think those were the themes. They focused on the emotion of this case, how this was such a tragic moment for this community, and they said, look, he confessed to this several times. Your thought on if those are the two strong points that they have?
I'm glad you asked that. I'm very passionate about this topic. Anyone who knows anything about my background and looks at, false confessions and defending people with false confessions, I'm very passionate about this, Julia. I'm riveted by this case. I'm riveted to see the results of this case. For me, it gets deeper than this, right? Clearly, the confessions were troubled. I don't think anybody, I'm not saying Richard Allen didn't do this. I'm not saying he did do it, right? The jury's going to tell us whether or not he did it or didn't do it. But what I think we can pretty much all agree on is the confessions are complete garbage. They cannot be relied on, right? He confessed to crimes that didn't even happen. I know for a fact that many, I don't know millions, but thousands and thousands of confessions are faulty. They're wrong. They've been proven later on. A lot of the people, when DNA evidence, for example, was introduced, in the late 20th century, right? Many people who had confessed were exonerated because the DNA evidence was tested in their case and they had nothing to do with the crime. So people who are watching need to know, just because somebody confesses to a crime does not mean they committed the crime. It's perverse. It's deep, it's psychological. There's a psychological need to get home and get out of the custody of the police where you are promised, and I'm not even saying police do anything wrong. I'm just saying there's a dynamic that exists. If you are in a car and you are drowning, you're going to panic. Panicking is bad, but you're going to panic anyway. If you don't panic when you're drowning, you have a higher chance of succeeding, of surviving, but you panic anyway. It's a human nature. It's also human nature to confess. Sometimes confessions are real, but sometimes confessions are not real, and you have a human psychological need sometimes to confess to get out of the custody of the police, right? Richard Allen, this is to the nth degree. He confessed, I think you said close to 60 times, over 60 times. I did not know it was that much. I know he had dozens of false confessions of crimes that didn't happen. So I'm riveted by this case. And one more thing, I'm very disappointed by the court for not letting the public see this case. Unlike many cases, this case was very important for society to see. Very important, especially the history of this case leading up to the trial, and then you don't let the public see this case. To me, that was completely awful. If I ever see this judge at some sort of a conference and I have the chance to talk, I'll tell her it was a mistake. Society needed to see this case. We have this big ability to deter future conduct, because of the facts in this case. Forget the confessions, just the remoteness of him being on that bridge and being on camera on that bridge. Imagine other people knowing that, hey, this person was convicted and he was on a remote bridge in a remote area, right? The bridge itself was remote and the area was remote. Even McDonald's in that area would have been remote, but this guy was in a remote abandoned bridge and he was on camera. The deterrence ability for that is massive. So I think it was a major mistake. I'm passionate about this case. I'm riveted to see the jury. I'm proud of this jury for not coming back for a verdict on the first day. I thought they'd come back with a verdict in day one of deliberation, but they've already gone longer than I thought they would. I'm proud of them. They're clearly doing their homework. They're clearly conflicted. So I'm riveted to see what happens.
Michael, I want to react to what you mentioned about confessions, because I think one thing a typical juror may struggle with is why would someone confess? And this is not what we see as a standard false confession situation, because he was not being interrogated. He denied it all through the interrogations. It's once he was behind bars, once he was talking to his own psychiatrist, once he was on the phone with his family and friends, that's when those confessions came out.
When he was put in solitary confinement at a prison.
Medicated.
And he hadn't even been convicted of a crime yet, and he is in a prison. Like, think about that for what it is. But these false confessions, as reported by Barbara McDonald, included that he had killed his grandchildren. He doesn't have grandchildren, that he raped the girls. They didn't suffer of a rape. Things like that were just factually very inaccurate. This is the only thing that this defense really has to go on right now, since they weren't allowed to bring in the artist renderings of the suspects that clearly don't look like him, at least one of them. They weren't allowed to bring in the cult idea of Odinism. So much was left out for this defense team that was argued in pretrial motions.
Yeah, I disagree with many of the things that the judge did. One thing I do agree with her was not allowing the sketches of the alternate suspects in, because to me that was not relevant. Those were made more for like investigative tools for looking at people. They were not actual renderings from like eyewitness testimony as you would see, right? So when you have a situation in a criminal case where somebody actually sees a suspect, they actually see a suspect, they say, I saw the suspect, and then they do a rendering of what that person saw. Those are always admitted, right? That's not what we were looking at here. We were looking at renderings where they were used purely as investigative tools, and one of them was somebody with long hair, one of them was somebody that was older. So they were completely all over the place. They were purely investigative tools. I do agree that those should have been left out, because those would have been just a mere distraction for the jury. And it was, I think, the day before trial that the motion was granted by the state to exclude them. But I do think that the judge made several other mistakes by not allowing the defense to point the finger at other suspects. I think that was a major mistake. So to me, this whole entire case has been troubled. The way this judge's conduct and decision path in this case has been troubled. And I've just been tainted by the fact that she didn't let the jury, the public, see the trial. But the one thing I agree with her was, and as a defense attorney, it's rare that I would agree with her in something like this, not allowing the renderings that were used as investigative tools. But I think that's the only thing I agree in terms of the major decisions she made pre-trial.
There have been some major ones. Let's talk about what could happen. We don't know what the jury's going to come back with, if they'll come back with a verdict. But what do you think this is going to be like for this case and for the public there? So many people have been watching this case, but those who are connected to Delphi and may have had some questions about how this was handled. What do you see going forward? What's this verdict going to represent?
I think that my personal opinion is, and I've looked at this case and I've looked at everything that's come through with this case, I believe that they're going to convict Richard Allen, right? That's my personal opinion. Because the video of him being on the bridge, of the person being on the bridge, really did look like him, had the same gait. It was very, very, very powerful, right? And then the bullet being found that was tied to his gun. It's not an overwhelming case against him. It's not. If you take out the confessions that he made, you're saying 60, I'm kind of shocked that it was that much, right? But if you take those out, I still think the case against him, the proximity, where he is, I think it fits. In terms of the community itself, will the community heal? It really depends. If the jury's out for 4 days, which would be an eternity in a case like this, right? Maybe they'll be conflicted. At the end of the day, this community and other communities which were robbed of the ability to see this trial, right? What they will see is, man, your daughters were just hiking on a trail. They weren't babies. They were young women, right? They were just hanging out, and then somebody killed them, right? It didn't even rape them, just killed them. So I think this community is going to be forever. I liken this to almost like a school shooting, right? It happens not just to a family, it happens to a community. This community has been injured. They won't live this down. They'll always have the fear and the specter. If I lived in this community, I'm sure every neighborhood says, hey, you're not allowed to go on this trail. There's a trail by my house, right? A wooden trail. I won't let my daughter go there. I won't let my kids go there, right? Because of this case, because I know about this case, which is why I thought that having this case not be shown on TV, I think it was a tragedy. But I personally have made decisions in my personal life because of this case. I live next to a wooden trail. I won't let my wife and kids go there without me. I'm always there because it's very similar to this case. So it's tragic. I think this community is going to suffer for decades.
And, you know, after the arrest 2 years ago of Richard Allen, they shrouded that in secrecy. They didn't release the affidavit for the arrest that had to be brought to court. And during the investigation, police kept their cards close to them as well. But, Michael, we have to leave the discussion there because we have to fit in a break. But first,
All right, that is it for Detective Ryan Kyle on the stand. Let's bring back in National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar. Michael, I think this is my first time talking to you about this particular case. If I'm a juror, though this is important information, this is the investigator who was there at the scene, I'm still thinking about the mother of the baby who was on the stand last, where at the very end of her testimony, she was questioned about whether or not she was worried that her own breast milk may have had something like Tylenol PM in it, and her friend tells her, delete the picture of you breastfeeding online.
And it didn't puzzle me that, her courtroom demeanor and the fact that she deleted the picture and the fact that she needed a break. It's because she's got a civil case going on, right? So she's got an attorney in her ear coaching her, telling her, listen, I know you got to testify, but if you say one wrong thing, you're going to tank the defense. I know that your question is about the picture, but she's sanitizing and getting ready for her civil case. It's not a shock to me that she had this demeanor and that she made those moves. At the end of the day, she was also worried about her own skin and her own culpability. And, anytime a 7-month-old dies, especially when they're nursing, you're going to point to the mother. Obviously, you're going to point to the mother, especially when there's a lethal dose of the Benadryl component in their system. The case has reasonable doubt riddled throughout it because of that picture that she deleted. Her testimony was not helpful. And at the end of the day, this case comes down to proximity. The child was in the care of the defendant. She was found dead. She was cold to the touch. She had a lethal dose of the ingredient in her system. And so the question is, really, there's only two people who could have administered to her mother or the defendant. Those are the only two people. That's it. The kid did not wake up and spring new legs and go and take Benadryl herself. She didn't go to the pharmacy herself. Somebody failed her, but it's one of these two people. And one of these two people is a defendant in this case. The other person has a 8-figure civil case going on against the Army. So this case is a little bit sad, and it's also riveting. I really want to follow this case all the way to the end and see what happens with both cases. It would not shock me if this defendant gets convicted. It also would not shock me if this defendant is acquitted and later on something comes out in the discovery from the civil case that maybe might bring the binoculars back on the mom from a criminal context.
All right, Michael Jaafar, thank you so much for that insight and legal analysis. We have to fit in a short break. Hear from our trial attorney standing by, National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar. You were pretty animated. I could see you in the monitors. What were you thinking?
She just won the case, and this is a public defender. She just won the case. This case is over. She just created reasonable doubt. She just established, and she's a public defender. I'm very proud of this attorney. She just established right there that the detective did not look at one of the other two suspects, in my opinion, the most likely suspect to administer something like this to a 7-month-old. They never tested. Obviously, it's too late to test now. She just won the case. If you wanted reasonable doubt, that's reasonable doubt. That's ample doubt. She just basically just destroyed this prosecution's case. I'm very proud of her. I'm proud of the job she did. The jury saw the mother obviously being a little bit odd and bizarre with her testimony, and then deleting the breast milk, the nursing thing, and then the defense attorney came up here and just crushed the prosecution's case. Like, you did not look at the most likely person, test the most likely person to administer something to a 7-month-old. A 7-month-old does not absorb something that you give them that easily. It's very difficult to give them. Yeah, theoretically, the defendant could have done it, could have put it in the formula, in the Similac, but there's ample reasonable doubt now. The public defender just won this case, in my opinion. I think reasonable doubt has been established before they even take the case. I'm very proud of the job she did.
Based on what we know so far and what the state has presented at this point, do you think that Dixie will need to testify, Michael?
I think she'll have to testify, absolutely. Well, no, let me take that back. No, I don't think she has to testify, no. She could testify. It would be helpful to testify. She doesn't have a criminal record. I think she has like a larceny or battery from 20 years ago. I don't think that would be, she would open the door by her testifying to that. I'm agnostic as to whether or not she testifies going forward, but I think it could help. But at the end of the day, for me, you're holding two aces right now in a poker hand with what your attorney just did. Very proud of the job she did.
I don't think I've ever seen Michael Jaafar change his opinion on the air, but we're going to have to say bye and thank you, Michael.
And coming up, we have an update. I've been inside of New York courtrooms for high-profile cases. No cameras allowed, so it's a similar situation, a little bit different in that it's pretty standard in New York to not have cameras. But in Indiana, it really was up to the judge as to whether or not cameras would be allowed in. And no readback is strange to me. I've heard judges who say you have to read the whole thing, so you can't just have a portion. Michael, your thoughts on these parameters on what we get to understand about deliberations as they go on?
I have no idea what this judge is doing. I don't know what's motivating her. There's something motivating this judge. I have no idea what it is. I'm not saying it's something nefarious, but it's definitely something a little bit, puzzling. I don't think I've ever seen a high-profile case where the judges have these arbitrary limitations on media and on people knowing. People should know about this case. The media should know about this case. She should not have all these restrictions, especially with the jury, right? Like the no readback. That puzzles me. I have no idea what that is. I don't know. I'm honestly, I'm very puzzled by it. On the prior block, I said that I'm disappointed with the way she's handled this case and with the decisions she made pre-trial, especially the ones related to the limited access or the no access. Now I'm just puzzled even more. Is she creating appealable error by having these restrictions? Maybe, perhaps. But especially a case of this magnitude, I mean, she lives in that community. She runs for office in that community. She's elected by the people in that community. Is it that when she was running for re-election, people in her community said, keep this private? I don't know. But I've been in these meetings where judges run for office and they have their constituents there tell them, hey, this is what we want to see you do. We want you to get criminals off the street. We want you to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've been sentencing probation to this church, have people come to this church and do cleanup here. We need more people there. I've seen that. Is it that her constituents told her, we need to keep this under wraps and keep it private so people don't cast aspersions on our community? Maybe, perhaps, I'm just guessing at this point, but something is motivating her. She's not being logical in the way that she's making these decisions. So I go back to the motivations of a person, especially when you understand the person is a political person, right? I'm not saying this is all politics, but I am saying that there's something motivating this judge to go down this path, which is why we are all puzzled by her decision. So that's all I can say, Julia. I'm just as puzzled as everybody else.
Well, we certainly don't know the exact details. We don't know any of the information that may be going on behind the scenes in that regard. But what Judge Gull has released and said publicly is just that she wants to protect the integrity of this trial, that she doesn't want the media circus. She doesn't want more publicity to create a situation where there's not a fair trial. There was even an incident early on in this case where there were photographs taken inside of the courtroom of the jury. And it almost seemed like she was saying, see, this is what I was worried about, and I can't let that continue to go. I'm not sure how not letting the public know and the media know about jury questions, or if they're deadlocked, achieves that position. But this is where we are. Barbara McDonald has been keeping us updated on everything that she can out of that courtroom in Delphi, Indiana. There is no doubt from Dr. Gates' testimony, this baby should be alive, healthy, no disease or injury. And that also suggests that there was no prior abuse to this child. Let's bring in trial attorneys Michael Jaafar and Mark. Tragic accident, perhaps? We don't know. And that's what this jury is going to be tasked with. Who was the one who would have created a scenario where this baby had this much of that Benadryl in her system? Michael, let me start with you, National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar. This witness, do you think he's going to be able to tell us anything about who, or is the jury just going to know the how?
The key thing in your question is who. That's what this case comes down to, is who. We know that somebody made a tragic mistake by giving the antihistamine to the baby, and that's her cause of death. It's who, right? And we know in the prior block, the court-appointed public defender attorney did a marvelous job by basically exposing that there was a major mistake in the investigation, big one, so big that the case, in my opinion, is lost for the state, which is they did not test the mother. There's only two people that could have done this, made this mistake, right? The mother or the caregiver. There's no allegation that someone broke in at night, gave her antihistamine, stole the wallet from the person, ran back out, right? It's only one of these two people, right? The woman that we're looking at on the screen, the defendant, or the mother. The mother was not tested. The mother has a civil case going on. I know that's not going to be relevant in the criminal case, but one of these two people, they did not test the mother. They're putting it on the caregiver. So I don't think that this witness is going to be able to tell, unless this witness says it's impossible for a nursed baby with breast milk for it to materialize enough antihistamine from the Tylenol PM, which we know the mother was saying. It's not possible for that to happen unless he can say that convincingly, which I will learn something new if he says that. Unless that's the case, unless he can find a way to rule out that the mother's breast milk did it, which I don't think that's what they brought him to do, I think that this case has an orb of reasonable doubt right in the middle of it. And that's my opinion, but we'll see. But he's definitely well-credentialed. Whatever he says, the jury's going to buy hook, line, and sinker because he definitely knows what he's talking about.